It's 1 o'clock in the morning and a fire call is reported to 911. A small apartment building is ablaze. The fire department responds. And they put the fire out. So arson investigators respond to these major fires to determine exactly how this began. As they examine the remains of the fire, there are multiple ignition points in the house, rags and clothing piled together. It becomes obvious to them that this fire was intentionally set.
Lieutenant, come check this out.
In this apartment, they discover human remains. Is this an accidental death? Is this someone who succumbed to smoke inhalation? Is it the person who started this fire? The arson investigator takes one step back and says,
"Call Metro. Tell them to get homicide down here right away."
They're not a suspect. They're a victim. There is a large knife protruding from their face. Wow.
My name is Lee Maroney. I'm a retired detective from the Louisville Metro Police Department. I worked there for 20 years. At least 11 of those were in homicide. I was always drawn to the process of investigations, working with homicide victims who don't have a voice, who can't tell you anything about what happened.
Lee Maroney. She started late into law enforcement. She was 29 when she came on the job. Worked hard, got assigned to homicide, was under a strong light because she was a woman.
I was the only female there, so I always wanted to prove myself as worthy and capable. It's just by nature. At that point, I was in homicide for 2 years. 2 years sounds like a long time, but you really are just getting started.
I had rookie years too. She's learning, and this case will teach her a lot.
Dispatch requesting homicide at the 100 block of Harlan Avenue.
Copy.
On this particular night, I was working the 4 to midnight shift. I was at the top of the list for the next homicide, and I responded to the scene.
Lieutenant? So what have we got here?
We were briefed by arson investigators that they had located a body within the home, and it did appear that there was foul play involved.
If you die in a fire because the building burns and you're unable to escape, it's not an arson. No one intentionally burned it. It's an accidental fire. You are an accidental death, and it's the sole responsibility of the fire department to complete the investigation. However, if arson is determined, then it becomes a criminal event that someone died in the course of an intentionally set fire. Then when you observe weapons are involved, there's no question it's a criminal event. It is a homicide, and it becomes a police matter. So it moves from accidental fire in the hands of the fire department to intentional murder and into the hands of the police.
Is it safe to go in?
Air quality isn't great, but we should be all right.
Nothing worse than a fire scene. Even though the fire is out, the heat is so intense, it retains for long periods of time. So you're perspiring heavily, and you can barely breathe because of the odor. I've responded to a number of fire scenes involving deaths. Everything made by man contains petroleum products of some type, be they plastic or asphalt or rayon or nylon or whatever they are. They have an absolutely foul smell, a unique odor that permeates your clothing, even your shoes. I have thrown away everything I was wearing at a fire scene. You cannot recover the odor from the clothing or even the shoes, because you will smell it forever. You never forget the odor of death, ever. And you never forget the odor of burning flesh, human flesh.
Arson investigators took us to the body, which appeared to be laying on a bed, face up.
Let's take a look.
It's hard to determine what exactly you're looking at. So we had to get a little bit closer at this point. Although we couldn't identify facial features, there was an obvious knife stuck in the face.
You ever seen anything like that?
That was very, very unusual. Nothing I've ever seen before, and certainly nothing I've ever seen since.
Maroney's looking at this crime scene, and it also points out to her something that's important. This is extremely personal. The stabbing in the face is somebody wanting to eliminate you, to destroy your memory. It's pure hate that drives that.
And then after that, you look at the style of the knife.
Looks like a kitchen knife.
The person there armed himself with a weapon of opportunity, a kitchen knife. He sees, he looks for, he finds in a drawer, whatever, and he attacks the victim with it. So it's not a planned event. And now we have to unravel this. How did this person come to be here in the condition they are in?
All right. Let's go take a look around and see who this guy is.
In identifying this victim, we always want to start with who lives here. And in determining that, you look for mail and you look for personal items around the house.
Hey, you got anything back there?
Not much.
Guess that was the point.
Based on the evidence that we saw at the crime scene, with pages of books being torn out and scattered about the room in general, it wouldn't happen that way unless it was deliberate.
This is a concealment fire. Concealment fires are set by perpetrators to try to destroy evidence and destroy a body, which is incredibly difficult to do. You're trying to scratch up the dirt to cover up the evidence of your sins. And it's not going to work. It never does.
Hey, Sarge.
Yeah.
Check this out.
Fortunately, not everything was destroyed. We located a black book that waiters typically carry in restaurants. I waited tables, I recognized it immediately.
All right. Let's get this back for evidence.
So when Maroney is inside examining the scene, a very concerned citizen shows up outside.
Sir,
What's going on?
I can't let you in here. This is a restricted
This is
area.
my place.
My name's Daryl Benzel. My wife and I, we own about 3 homes, 4 units altogether. Harlan Avenue was one of our first. That night, my neighbor called to tell us that our house was on fire. So I rushed over there, and it was a devastating sight.
You gotta tell me what's going on. Is there anyone inside?
And he's like, yes. And I said, well, is he dead? And he's like, yes, he's dead. And I'm like, oh, Lord. And about that time, I saw Lee.
Daryl?
Chester, 1960.
I said, hey, Daryl, what brings you here? And he informed me at that point that he owned the house.
I knew her father and brother, and then I met Lee, and we developed a friendship.
It's rare that you know a person as a witness, so it was unusual for me to see him. But once I did, I thought, well, great, I know him. He'll be comfortable speaking with me. I could probably get a lot of information from him.
How many people live here?
Just one. The rest of the units are all vacant.
Do you have a name?
Yeah, it's Eddie. It's Eddie Poynter.
I immediately recognized the name and that this was a person that I had actually met several months prior to this incident.
She looks back at these charred remains with a blade through its face and says, God, Eddie, what happened to you? It's bad enough to look at a stranger who's been violently killed. To look at somebody you know and you knew in life, it's just the worst feeling.
How'd you know this guy anyway?
He's friends with my brother. I actually met him not that long ago.
He was waiting tables in a restaurant called Cunningham's, and my brother and I happened to be eating there, and Eddie stopped by to say hello to my brother. I just know that Eddie made a big impact on my brother.
They were in AA together.
Eddie Poynter. He's had a long history of suffering from substance abuse, both alcohol and drugs. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous.
The AA program is all about helping someone get and stay sober. And so in this case, he had been sober quite a while.
Eddie was trying to get himself together, to be a lot more responsible. He tried to help others.
He became a sponsor for dozens of people. He has done a lot to come back from the abyss that he was about to fall into.
Every homicide victim I've encountered, I did not know. I knew nothing about them. So this was an unusual case for me, knowing that he had an impact, a very positive impact on people's lives. And it really did change my view of victims from then on. I didn't look at my victims as numbers. They just became human. One of the first things we do in a homicide investigation is what's called a neighborhood canvass, to see what the neighbors saw, what they heard, what they know.
Morning, ma'am. Metro PD. Just hoping you could answer some questions for me.
Okay, sure.
I worked for the Louisville Metro Police Department for 22 years before I retired. Sometimes you have certain cases that really pique your interest, and this is one of those cases. You have a fire that somebody tried to light and cover up a death. When you have a knife stabbed to the face, I mean, it's just aggression, uncontrolled aggression. And it's scary.
Morning, ma'am.
Hello.
Metro PD.
We went and did our canvass. We spoke with several people. They said that Eddie, he was a nice guy. He worked. I mean, I didn't hear a bad thing about him at all. There was nothing out there that would have caused somebody to come after him and kill him.
Because the injuries were to the face, I wasn't convinced that the knife wound itself was the cause of death.
You're not going to die if somebody plants a knife blade under your cheekbone. The odds are you're going to survive that 99 times out of 100.
So we needed to wait for the autopsy to give us the understanding of what exactly caused the victim's death.
So, what are we looking at?
Well, his lungs are clear, so it wasn't the smoke inhalation that killed him. Take a look at this.
Stab wounds are discovered, multiple wounds through the lungs, through the liver, through the abdominal aorta, all over the place. A blitz attack with a knife. Stab, 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 stab. And the final blow is the one in the face.
Homicide 101 is, any type of overkill situation or violence to that degree has an emotional component to it. Maybe he had a relationship with this person. Maybe he was a friend. So you start from there and you work out.
So it's now to the point to where Maroney has to notify the family of Mr. Poynter's untimely demise. She identifies a person, Faye Brown, who is the mother to Mr. Poynter.
His mom lived in a different city in Kentucky. They were a very close-knit family.
He didn't deserve this.
Brown tells Maroney Mr. Poynter was born and raised in a small town in Kentucky, and that Eddie is gay. Initially, when Eddie Poynter was young, he had a child with a woman and didn't come out as gay until later in his life.
He grew up in Edmonton, Kentucky. That's part of the Bible Belt. And probably at that time when he was growing up, something you didn't come out and say.
Mr. Poynter felt it was important to move into a big city where there is a possibility of a more favorable environment for those who are homosexual. So he elected to move to Louisville for that reason.
Coming to the city, yes, he found a lot more opportunity to be happy or find other people that he wanted to be with.
So at this point, what we want to find out is who was responsible for Eddie's murder. Did Eddie have any significant relationships? What is he dating anybody? Who were his closest friends? Once notification is made to the family, news spreads quickly. I was contacted by Gary Perry. He was very close friends with Eddie, and that if there was any information that he could provide, he wanted to assist in this because Eddie was so dear to him.
This is where we'd usually see Eddie.
Poynter had a favorite spot where he liked to go.
It was a small hole-in-the-wall gay bar downtown, a little bit more homey than a busy dance bar.
Eddie was real quiet. He didn't drink. He just came for the company.
Gary said Eddie didn't socialize a lot, that he wasn't necessarily in a romantic relationship with anybody seriously.
The only person I ever see Eddie with was Blaine.
Gary explains that one of Poynter's best friends is a 73-year-old man who is also gay, whose name is Blaine Thacker.
Eddie and Blaine were both gay men in the restaurant industry and worked odd hours, and I think they just struck a friendship.
Just very, very good friends. I think Blaine took care of Eddie. When he was hard on his luck, Eddie lived with Blaine for a little bit, or on and off.
Maroney says, okay, so Blaine Thacker, have you seen him lately?
Come to think of it, he hasn't been in here lately either.
Is that unusual for him?
Yeah, I'd say it is.
When someone is doing something that's beyond their usual activities and they're associated with a homicide victim, that's a little worrisome. Why are you not in here like you always are? And your friend is dead. Did you have something to do with him?
So Anna Masterson?
They go to the restaurant where Blaine Thacker works and find out some very interesting information.
I was looking for one of your cooks, Blaine Thacker.
I'm co-owner of Masterson's Catering, third-generation family business. Blaine worked for us for around 30 years, and we were very concerned when he didn't show up. Blaine was always there, always on time. He was early.
We called his house, no one answered.
We just kind of gave it benefit of the doubt. Maybe he'll show up later. But the second day he didn't show up, we knew there was something wrong.
So your best friend is dead and you're suddenly in the wind. Well, we're getting warmer.
Mr. Thacker, you in there? It's Metro PD, open up.
It was concerned to us, and so we went over to the apartment and had the manager open up the door for us. We went into the apartment.
Mr. Thacker?
We went into the back room. So you could see he was dead. Once we removed all the blankets, it was obvious that he had been stabbed numerous times.
It's this very similar method as to what is seen in Mr. Poynter. It is a blitz attack. Mr. Thacker has innumerable stab wounds in the chest, more than sufficient to kill him.
My jaw just kind of dropped and hit the floor. The last thing I expected to hear was that we have another victim.
It's not a coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence. Louisville Metro homicide detective Lee Maroney has 2 homicide victims in the same night. Both have been brutally stabbed in the same manner. Could they be related?
It's not uncommon to have 2 murders in the same night, but it is uncommon to have them in such close proximity and the victims to be very good friends and to have similar lifestyle. Both Eddie and Blaine were gay men in the restaurant industry.
So we have a multiple victim homicide case and 2 separate events. Now we're talking about a very dangerous killer who is not in custody and not even identified.
I mean, if he'd killed 2, were there other bodies elsewhere? It really made us very concerned for the safety of other people in the city. And so it really kind of kicked up our case to a different level. We had to get this guy.
Maroney.
Detective Maroney gets a call from her partner, who's still at the first crime scene, who says he's found a witness there that he would like Maroney to speak to.
You got this?
Yeah.
So she immediately goes back to the scene.
Hey, Sarge. This guy says he's looking for a friend of his.
The subject's name was Charles Mullins, and Mr. Mullins stated that he had a friend that had been staying in the apartment with Eddie Poynter.
This is a shock to Maroney, because as far as she knows, Eddie Poynter was the only person living in this place. Who's your friend?
He identified his friend as someone he grew up with in Ashland, Kentucky, and his name was Dale Moneypenny. He stated that Dale had a friend or a girlfriend that was also there named Jennifer Smith.
His girlfriend was staying here too.
Yeah, as far as I know.
He says he just met that girl, Jennifer. I don't know her very well. She goes to college, I think.
I heard about the fire. Are they okay?
Well, they weren't in there.
Hey, Sarge, you got a second?
Yeah. Hey, do you mind finishing up?
The arson investigator came out and said, hey, we were going through some of the debris in the house, and we did find this notebook. And I don't know if you guys want it or not, but it has a name in it, Jennifer Smith.
The same name that our witness says he believes is Moneypenny's girlfriend. So now we have some evidence that Jennifer Smith at least had some of her possessions in this apartment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now Maroney's faced with a dilemma. Who are these people? How well do they know Mr. Poynter? Are they involved in this, or are they just not home when the fire occurs? It could be either one, but we need to find them.
At that point, we know Jennifer Smith. That's it. Very common name. It's like a needle in a haystack.
Jennifer Smith isn't going to be simple to find, but Mr. Moneypenny might be. How many Moneypennies are there? Probably not many. So Detective Maroney runs the name through the system, and all the lights brighten up.
We were able to pull a picture of Mr. Moneypenny. He was young, he was attractive, piercing blue eyes, but he had a criminal history. He liked to steal things. He liked to run from the police. He liked to resist arrest. He liked to assault people.
Also, they discover that he has a car registered to him.
All that we know is he drives a black Honda Accord, and he's originally from Ashland. So we made notifications to the police department in Ashland, Kentucky. We did put a flag through our NCIC system that if this license plate or this vehicle is seen, we are looking for this individual. A few days later, the car was located by the Louisville Metro Police Department. It was brought in for processing.
It was found abandoned on a city street in Louisville and was towed away as an abandoned motor vehicle. They still can't find Moneypenny, but they have found his car. And that car could lead him somewhere, so let's go see what's in it.
Jesus, what a mess.
And they look inside and they see drug paraphernalia, crack pipes that have been used, burned spoons, all that sort of thing. Now we have a whole new ballgame. Drug people will do anything to get their hands on drugs. Will they kill? Yeah, they will. Will they set fire to a place? Of course. No one understands what a demon you become when you become addicted to narcotics. You are no longer who you were. You're not like anyone else. You will do anything. There are no limits to what you will do to get your hands on drugs or the money to purchase them. You have no sympathy, no empathy, no anything. You are driven by one thing alone: the need for narcotics. It destroys you and everyone around you. It's playing Russian roulette with 5 cylinders loaded instead of 1.
The fact that the car was located empty told me that Dale either took a Greyhound bus, he stole a vehicle, or he's hooked up with a rat out of town.
Dale is in the wind, so where's Jennifer? What does she know about this or have to do with it? We don't know. We don't know. That common name is a complication.
Did you see this?
So this notebook has the name Jennifer Smith on it. It also has the name of the school. So Maroney's detectives contact the school.
Office of Admissions.
Yeah, Metro PD. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions.
Do you have a student named Jennifer Smith? Yes, we do. Does she live in Louisville, Kentucky? No, she does not.
We were ultimately able to determine that Jennifer Smith was staying with her mother over in Jeffersonville, Indiana.
So they send the local authorities in Indiana to her home to see if they can make contact. They don't find her there, so we are on the lookout in Indiana for Jennifer Smith, the elusive girlfriend of the even more elusive Mr. Moneypenny. She is, at a minimum, an important witness in this case.
Maroney.
A few days later, I got a call that Jennifer Smith had reached out to another police department in Indiana, stating that she knew that the Louisville Metro Police Department was looking for her.
She goes, I want to clear my conscience. I want to make this right.
Okay, I'll be right there.
Once you get a call like that, you drop what you're doing.
Jennifer Smith is a roommate to someone who's been murdered and then set on fire. She has a boyfriend who abandoned a car filled with drug paraphernalia that she undoubtedly has been riding in. And she has now crossed a state line into Indiana to get away from all of this.
Why don't you start by telling me about your relationship with Dale Moneypenny?
Well, he sort of just came out of nowhere.
Jennifer explains that she initially is overwhelmed by his beauty. The Moneypenny is so pretty, and she never had a boyfriend like this before.
She'd only known him about 10 days prior to this. They kind of met like on the street, brought together by drugs and alcohol. And we're both kind of living this same lifestyle, and they bonded.
He told her that they're going to go on a crime spree. He's going to con people out of their money. He explains to her he has this method by which he uses his appearance in his youth to make himself attractive to homosexual men because he knows he is. What he wants is their money. And they're going to just buy drugs and have a good time and party on. They're going to be the new Bonnie and Clyde. That sounds like one hell of an idea to her.
I don't think this was her nature. She doesn't have a criminal history, but I think she just got roped into something by a guy who had some control over her.
So how did the two of you end up hooking up with Eddie? We met Eddie at a gay bar. We needed a place to crash, so he let us stay with him for a few nights.
How long are you going to be in town?
They met Eddie, a very nice man, welcomed them into his home.
You got any money? Yeah, get a drink there, buddy.
Their plan was to stay there for a couple days, taking advantage of that situation.
So then, how did Eddie end up getting killed?
So she says, blurts out, I didn't do anything to hurt that guy. I just gave him the lighter to start the fire. Really, Jennifer? Well, that makes a big difference then, doesn't it? When she says that, she has their attention.
So Dale was the one who killed Eddie?
She wasn't aware that he was going to do that. But once everything got out of hand, she went along with it.
There's something else.
But what she says next really gets their attention.
She goes, oh yeah, she goes, there's another person that we did the same thing to.
I didn't know he'd kill that old guy, I swear.
What old guy would that be? Well, his name is Blaine Thacker.
Jennifer Smith told us that they knew Blaine Thacker because he was a friend of Eddie's and one of his closer friends.
She said, you know, we met him, went up to his apartment, he bought us some food.
I think her thoughts were, we're going to go over here, get something to eat, figure out what the heck just went on, and where were we going to go from here.
Dale and Blaine went into the back room. And Dale comes out. And he had blood on him.
What happened?
We have to go.
What did you...
We have to go now.
I swear I never thought he'd take things that far.
Jennifer gave a lot of details. You know, it's not like somebody was lying. She's just being straightforward about everything that happened.
I think she knew she was in way over her head, and I got to get out of this.
She says, I didn't want to go out like Bonnie and Clyde in a hail of police gunfire, so I went back to Indiana. And where did he go? Well, he said he was going to go to Miami, but he says a lot of things.
You have your suspect, and you also have Jennifer. So you got to figure out what you can do with Jennifer.
We arrested Jennifer Smith for complicity to commit murder and arson.
Jennifer Smith has given them what they want, the killer of two different people. And his name is Dale Moneypenny. Like the wolf who circles the herd, He looks for the young and the inattentive and the sick and the ones who present as a victim, and they become those.
Once we heard he was going to Florida, Lee did whatever she needed to do to get him indicted.
We did notify Miami-Dade County that he could be in their general area and that there were warrants for him through NCIC for the double murders. And as personal as it was for Dale to kill Eddie and Blaine, it became as personal for me to find him and make sure that justice was served.
Several weeks pass. There are 2 detectives in this town in Florida that are looking for someone in some other matter when they see this car driving erratically and they stop it. Dale Moneypenny is in the front seat. They run the name. He's wanted for murder. Well, hello, Dale. We've been looking for you, and now we found you.
Step out of the car, please, sir.
Criminals, when they have success committing their crime, begin to believe they're geniuses. They are all Professor Moriarty, by heaven, and there is no policeman in the world that's going to find them because they're so clever. And the next thing you know, he's over the hood of a car and he's in handcuffs, shocked that he has wound up there.
My understanding is that when Dale was down in Florida, he encountered older gay male in a bar, and they subsequently went back to a hotel room, at what point Dale Moneypenny tied him up, stole his credit cards, and stole his car.
Well, there's a big surprise. That's what he does. Mr. Moneypenny is arrested for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, and he will be extradited to the state of Kentucky to answer for his crime.
Fugitive detectives went down and flew home with him.
You always feel better when you have somebody in custody, especially someone like that. It's a sense of relief of accomplishment that you're able to catch them and get them locked up and off the streets.
Immediately after getting off the plane, they brought him to the homicide office, and we were ready, and we began an interview with him. I remember looking at him and just thinking, you know, he's just a kid. He did not ask for an attorney. He agreed to sit down and talk. He appeared to me to be tired of running.
All right, Dale. We aren't here to judge you. We just want to know the truth.
You know, as a female detective, a lot of times you appear to the younger suspects as a motherly type figure, and you're easier to talk to for them, especially about horrible things that they've done. It worked in this case.
Yeah, I can tell you what I know.
How about you start with Eddie Poynter?
Eddie.
Dale said that he needed a place to stay. Eddie opened his home to Mr. Moneypenny and allowed him and Jennifer to stay there. Moneypenny used his good looks and his charm to manipulate Eddie into giving him what he needed or wanted.
Hey, man. Eddie, you got any money for me?
Look, Dale, I can't have you guys freeloading here anymore.
And now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he said he was kicking us out.
Eddie had told him that he and Jennifer were no longer going to be able to stay in his house and that they were going to have to find another place to live. And that set him into a rage.
Do you understand me?
No, I don't think so.
He was so outraged that he turned around and killed him.
His rubber band breaks. Something in his head comes unplugged. What is that? I have no idea, but it does. And when it does, he is a raving banshee with a knife in his hand. Dale now comes back out of the ether of his rage and realizes this mess he's created. How are you going to stop the police from finding this? And he comes up with a genius idea of burning it down. That fire will fix it all. He gathers up clothing around the room and paper.
Give me a lighter.
Starts a series of small fires, assuming it will ignite the place. He's right, it does. Pretty soon it's fully involved and they run.
So then we need someplace to stay.
And then they said, what are we going to do now?
So they wander off to another place where they've been, which is Blaine Thacker's house. Blaine takes them in because he's a nice man. Dale snaps again.
Dale just took matters into his own hands, knew that he needed financial resources to either get out of town or get where he needed to go, and killed Mr. Thacker and then stole from him as well.
Was that you and Jennifer's plan all along?
Nah. She didn't know any of that was gonna happen.
Dale knew Jennifer had been arrested and confirmed her statements that her responsibility was not as great as his. Jennifer Smith decided to plead guilty to avoid trial, and her sentence was a 10-year sentence to serve.
Dale pleads guilty, and he's sentenced to life in prison. What does he do with that? Well, he engages in pen pals for criminals. I'm sure he tells them he lives in a gated community. You know, like a prison. Good Lord.
He may have pled guilty just to avoid the death penalty, but he's shown no remorse or nothing for these victims. He could care less.
I'm happy he's in jail. I don't know that there's ever really justice. I mean, it's not going to bring Blaine back. It's not going to bring Eddie back. And their lives were cut short for what?
These guys couldn't have been more innocent a victim as they get. I just think they were victims of opportunity and victims of opening their home to the wrong person. I think Dale was a con man, and he knew the power of his charm and what that could do for him.
Moneypenny inserts himself into people's lives. He's like a tick. He crawls on the surface of your skin and buries himself in it. He endears himself to you. He uses every ploy within his power to gain your trust, your attention, and your affection. And eventually he determines what you have that he might want. And if you resist that happening, then I'm sorry, you're going to have to die.
It's mind-boggling that a human being could do something like that to another human being. Thank goodness for law enforcement and people that are able to find these people and put them where they need to be.
Detective Maroney used her instincts and her training to resolve the death of two people, to put someone responsible for that in a can where he belongs. That's the effort shown by all homicide detectives, to stand in the shoes of the victim, because they can't anymore. and to give punishment for those that took that victim away.
The call came in just after midnight, a thin, shaking voice swallowed by static, a whisper that barely made it through the storm tearing across Montgomery County. A woman screaming, then silence. When deputies reached the small farmhouse off Highway 105, the front door was open, swinging in the wind, the porch light flickering like a dying pulse. Inside, the television hummed to an empty room. A coffee cup lay shattered on the kitchen floor. And in the bedroom, beneath a window forced open from the outside, 27-year-old Melissa Carter was gone. No signs of struggle beyond the broken glass. No overturned furniture. No blood. Just absence. The kind that chills the air and settles into your lungs. The kind that turns an ordinary address into a headline. Missing woman, possible abduction, community on edge. By sunrise, the road was lined with patrol cars. Yellow tape snapped in the wind. Neighbors gathered in tight circles, whispering theories that grew darker with every retelling. Melissa was a schoolteacher. Engaged. Known for waving at passing cars, for bringing pies to church potlucks, for living quietly. Too quietly, some would later say, as if a quiet life invited violence. Search teams combed the woods. Volunteers on horseback pushed through thick brush. Dogs tracked a scent from the bedroom window to the edge of the property, then stopped abruptly at the gravel driveway, where tire impressions cut through the mud, half washed away by rain. Detectives photographed everything, measured everything. Bagged shards of glass, fibers from the windowsill, cigarette butts found near the fence line. They believed they were hours behind a predator who had planned every step. By the second day, the story led the evening news. Texas cold case in the making, one anchor said prematurely, as if already sensing the shadow this crime would cast. Helicopters circled overhead. Reporters knocked on doors. The Carter family stood on their front lawn and begged for information, their voices cracking under the weight of camera lights. But the woods gave up nothing. No footprints. No discarded weapon. No body. Days turned into weeks. The fiancé, Daniel Reeves, sat through hours of questioning. His alibi checked out, working late at a refinery, badge scans confirming his timeline. Friends vouched for him. Detectives pressed harder anyway. Relationships fracture under scrutiny. Secrets crawl out when exposed to fluorescent light. But Daniel held steady. Grief-stricken. Cooperative. Cleared, at least publicly. Then came the first break, or what looked like one. A trucker reported seeing a woman matching Melissa's description at a rest stop near Huntsville the night she vanished. Blonde hair, barefoot, crying. Surveillance cameras were grainy in 1988, shadows more than faces, but deputies pulled the tape. They replayed it frame by frame. A figure stepped into view for less than 2 seconds, then disappeared behind a vending machine. Too blurred to confirm. Too haunting to ignore. The lead fizzled. The trucker recanted under pressure, unsure now of what he had seen. Memory is fragile when spotlighted. The investigation pressed on. Months later, a fisherman discovered a woman's scarf tangled in brush along the Trinity River. Melissa owned a scarf like it, white with blue stitching. Detectives rushed it to the lab. Fibers compared. Threads analyzed. The result? Inconclusive. The scarf could belong to anyone. In Texas heat, evidence decays fast, certainty even faster. The case file thickened. Interviews stacked up. Tips poured in from psychics, from prison inmates claiming knowledge in exchange for leniency, from strangers who swore they saw a suspicious van parked near the farmhouse weeks before the disappearance. A composite sketch emerged from one neighbor's account. A tall man, late 30s, dark hair, sharp jawline, but no one could put a name to it. It joined the bulletin board of possibilities, another ghost pinned to cork. By 1990, the headlines faded. A new tragedy replaced the old. Melissa's photograph yellowed in the evidence room. Detectives rotated assignments. Fresh cases demanded attention. The word unsolved began to trail her name like a shadow that refused to lift. Still, someone kept the file on their desk. Detective Harold Boone had been on the force for 22 years when Melissa disappeared. Methodical, unflashy, the kind of investigator who believed answers lived in the details others overlooked. He studied the tire impressions again, years later, comparing them to databases that were primitive by today's standards. He revisited witness statements, circling phrases that felt off. One neighbor had mentioned hearing a metallic clink around midnight, like a tool dropped on concrete. At the time, it meant nothing. Now Boone wondered if it signaled preparation, a crowbar, perhaps, slipping from a gloved hand. But wondering is not proof. And proof is what the district attorney required. In 1993, a construction crew broke ground on a housing development 15 miles from Melissa's home. Rumors ignited when workers unearthed animal bones and a scrap of fabric. The sheriff's department halted construction for 48 hours. Forensic teams descended. The bones belonged to deer. The fabric was decades old, unrelated. Another dead end. Another surge of hope extinguished. The Carter family moved away in 1995. They could not bear the drive past that bedroom window, the echo of unanswered questions in every creak of the house. Daniel left Texas entirely. Some said he ran from suspicion that never fully evaporated. Others said he ran from grief. Either way, the town's population shrank, but the story lingered, whispered to newcomers like a cautionary tale. Years blurred. Technology evolved. DNA profiling transformed criminal investigations nationwide. Cold cases reopened under the promise of science catching up to violence. In 2002, Melissa's evidence boxes were dusted off, shipped to a state lab equipped with tools unimaginable in 1988. Fibers re-examined. Glass fragments retested. The cigarette butts near the fence line yielded partial DNA profiles, too degraded for a match in early databases. The results were filed away, tagged for future comparison. Hope flickered, faint but alive. Meanwhile, a pattern surfaced in neighboring counties. 2 attempted abductions in the late 80s, both thwarted when victims fought back. Both reported a man entering through a window after cutting phone lines. Both described a vehicle idling nearby. Detectives compared notes. The composite sketches bore similarities: height, build, the intensity in the eyes. Yet no arrests tied the incidents together. If it was the same predator, he had either grown cautious or moved on. The possibility gnawed at Boone. A serial offender who slipped through their fingers. A man who refined his method after Melissa. Or worse, a man who succeeded once and never needed to try again. By 2008, Boone retired. The plaque they handed him felt heavier than it should have. He carried home a cardboard box of personal effects, but one item remained burned into memory: Melissa Carter's file. He told himself he had done everything possible. He told himself some cases resist resolution. Yet on quiet evenings, he replayed the crime scene in his mind, adjusting angles, reconsidering timelines, searching for the fracture point where truth might break through. In the town she left behind, the farmhouse changed owners twice. Renovations covered scars. New paint hid the marks where investigators once dusted for prints. Children played in the yard, unaware of the history beneath their feet. But older residents never forgot. They locked their windows tighter. They watched unfamiliar cars with suspicion. A single disappearance had reshaped their sense of safety. Then, on the 20th anniversary of the night Melissa vanished, a local newspaper ran a retrospective. 20 years later, Texas cold case still haunts community. Boone read it at his kitchen table. The article quoted former deputies, family friends, even Daniel Reeves, who spoke from out of state, voice thin over the phone. "I just want to know what happened," he said. The same plea, unchanged by time. Boone stared at the grainy photo printed beside the headline, Melissa smiling, sunlight in her hair. He felt something shift. Not closure, not relief. A disturbance, like a loose thread tugged from fabric. He rose, walked to the spare bedroom where old boxes gathered dust, and pulled down a folder he had no official right to keep. Personal notes, copies of statements, sketches he had drawn in the margins. He spread them across the bed. the metallic clink, the tire tracks, the partial DNA profile, and one detail he had dismissed decades earlier. A utility company record showing a brief outage on Melissa's road the night she disappeared, logged at 11:47 p.m., restored within minutes. At the time, technicians blamed weather. But the storm had intensified after midnight. What if the outage wasn't nature at all? What if someone had tampered with a transformer to darken the road, to erase silhouettes, to cloak a getaway? Boone felt the old engine of suspicion roar back to life. He picked up the phone and dialed a former colleague still active in the department. His voice, older now, carried urgency that surprised even him. "I think we missed something," he said. Outside, the Texas skies stretched wide and indifferent. 2 decades had passed. Evidence had aged. Witnesses had scattered. Yet somewhere, perhaps believing himself safe, a man carried the memory of a flickering porch light, a shattered coffee cup, and a window forced open in the rain. And for the first time in years, the silence surrounding Melissa Carter's disappearance felt less like an ending and more like the breath before a confession. The next morning, Harold Boone stood beneath a sky the color of steel, staring at the same road he had memorized 30 years earlier, the gravel now repaved, the ditches trimmed, the farmhouse remodeled into something brighter, almost cheerful, as if paint and landscaping could disinfect memory. He kept his distance, no badge on his belt anymore, no authority except the weight of obsession, and he watched the power lines stretching along the property, thin black veins against the horizon, wondering how easy it would have been for someone with the right tools to climb, to tamper, to create a blackout so brief no one would question it. A transformer doesn't fail politely. It pops, it flashes, it leaves a scar in the night, and suddenly that metallic clink reported by the neighbor stopped sounding random and started sounding intentional, like preparation disguised as accident. Back at the sheriff's office, the reception area had new paint and digital monitors cycling through community announcements, but the evidence room smelled the same. Dust, cardboard, time. Boone's former colleague, now Captain Ellis, unlocked a metal cabinet and slid out the familiar box labeled Carter, Melissa, 1988. The letters were faded, but the weight inside hadn't changed. Ellis raised an eyebrow. "You think the outage matters?" Boone didn't answer immediately. He lifted the lid and began laying out the artifacts of a vanished life. Photographs of the bedroom window, shards of glass in labeled bags, the white scarf that may or may not have belonged to her, and a thin envelope containing the partial DNA profile extracted years ago from those cigarette butts near the fence. Technology had leapt forward since that profile was first logged. Databases were deeper now, genealogical matches mapping family trees across the country. What once produced silence might finally speak. Ellis leaned against the table. "You want it resubmitted?" Boone nodded. "Run it through everything," he said, voice low but steady. "And pull utility records for that entire week in '88, not just the summary. I want technician notes, maintenance logs, any service calls within a 5-mile radius." Ellis hesitated, reminded him budgets were tight, cold cases endless. Boone met his gaze without blinking. If someone cut power deliberately, they knew what they were doing. That's not impulse. That's planning. Planning leaves patterns. Patterns leave trails. Within days, the lab confirmed the DNA profile was viable enough for advanced comparison. The sample was partial but distinctive, male, no immediate hit in Cody's, but suitable for familial searching. The request went out. Somewhere in the vast web of distant cousins and forgotten branches, a digital ripple began. Meanwhile, the deeper dive into utility records unearthed something small and easy to overlook. A handwritten notation by a junior technician dispatched the morning after the outage. The note described evidence of manual interference at the transformer closest to Melissa's property, scratches near the access panel, bolts loosened but not removed. The technician had assumed vandals. No follow-up. No police notification beyond the outage report. Boone stared at the photocopy, pulse quickening. Someone had physically accessed that transformer. Someone comfortable enough in darkness to manipulate infrastructure without panic. The news of renewed activity leaked, as it always does. A local reporter caught wind and aired a segment. Texas 1988 cold case re-examined. New forensic push. Old faces appeared on screen, older now, voices lined with age. Melissa's parents, living 2 states away, declined interviews, but released a statement expressing cautious hope. Daniel Reeves, tracked down once more, sounded weary. "I've answered every question for 30 years, he said. "If they find something new, I hope it finally gives peace." The word peace hung heavy, almost foreign. Tips flooded in again, a tidal wave of speculation. A former electrician called claiming he once worked with a man who bragged about knowing how to kill a block's power without anyone noticing. A retired mechanic reported selling oversized tires in the late 80s to a customer who matched the composite sketch. Boone sifted through each claim with measured skepticism. Most were noise. But noise sometimes hides signal. Then the lab called. A genealogical search had identified a potential familial link, third cousin range, to a man named Thomas Kessler, residing less than 40 miles from the original crime scene. Age, 63. Former utility subcontractor in the late 1980s. Employment records confirmed short-term contracts with the Regional Electric Cooperative during that period. Boone felt the air thin. Kessler's name had never surfaced in the original investigation. No criminal record beyond a misdemeanor trespassing charge in 1991. Married. 2 grown children. Quiet reputation. Ellis arranged surveillance quietly, careful not to tip off a man who might have evaded suspicion for decades. Detectives photographed Kessler entering a modest home at dusk, mowing his lawn on Sundays, loading fishing gear into a pickup truck. Ordinary routines. The kind that camouflage extraordinary secrets. A trash pull yielded cigarette butts from the same brand found near Melissa's fence, an old regional label discontinued in the early 90s. Forensic comparison began immediately. As results processed, Boone requested Kessler's historical work logs. In August 1988, Kessler had been assigned to inspect transformers along Highway 105, the same corridor as Melissa's farmhouse, just 2 weeks before her disappearance. No documented call the night of the outage, but subcontractors often operated without strict oversight, paperwork lagging behind action. The timeline tightened like a noose. When the DNA comparison returned, the room fell silent. The profile from Kessler's discarded cigarette butt matched the partial DNA recovered in 1988 with a statistical probability strong enough to seek a warrant. Not absolute certainty, but a convergence impossible to ignore. Ellis exhaled slowly. "After 30 years," he murmured. The arrest happened at dawn. Squad cars rolled quietly into Kessler's driveway as the sky blushed pink. He stepped onto his porch in slippers, confusion etched across his face as deputies approached. Boone watched from a distance, heart hammering not with triumph, but with a strange, hollow dread. Kessler did not resist. He simply asked, "What's this about?" When informed he was being detained in connection with the disappearance of Melissa Carter, he blinked once, twice, as if the name traveled through decades to reach him. "That was a long time ago," he said softly. Not denial. Not outrage. Just acknowledgement of time. Inside the interrogation room, fluorescent lights hummed. Kessler sat upright, hands folded, eyes steady. Detectives laid out the evidence methodically. The transformer interference, the employment records, the DNA match. He listened without visible panic. When Boone entered, the air shifted. 2 men separated by age, but bound by a single night in 1988. "You had access to that transformer," Boone said evenly. Kessler shrugged faintly. "A lot of people did." Boone slid a photograph across the table, Melissa smiling, unaware of the storm approaching her life. "Do you recognize her?" Kessler's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Everyone recognized her," he replied. "It was all over the news." Hours passed. Questions circled. Kessler's answers remained measured, neither confessing nor fully denying. He admitted to working in the area, admitted to smoking near job sites, claimed no memory of that specific night. Memory, again, the fragile shield. Outside, the media frenzy reignited. Headlines flashed. Texas 1988 cold case cracked. Retired detective's tip leads to arrest. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Commentators debated the strength of partial DNA, the ethics of genealogical searches, the reliability of aging witnesses. The community buzzed with shock. The quiet utility worker, the man who fixed power lines, the neighbor who waved politely. Yet one question loomed heavier than all others. Where was Melissa? Without a body, without a confession, the case teetered between resolution and uncertainty. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Kessler's property. Cadaver dogs swept the yard. Ground-penetrating radar scanned beneath the shed, beneath the old oak tree, beneath a concrete slab poured in 1992. Excavation began. Dirt piled high. Cameras zoomed in. Nothing. No remains. No trace. Just soil layered with years of rain and roots. In the interrogation room, Boone leaned forward, voice lower now, almost weary. "You cut the power," he said. "You knew that road would go dark. You knew she'd be alone." Kessler's eyes flickered, a crack in composure. "You don't know what I knew," he whispered. The whisper carried more weight than a shout. As night fell, the town held its breath. An arrest had been made, a name attached to decades of fear. But certainty remained elusive, suspended like that porch light in a storm, flickering between truth and doubt. Boone stepped outside the station, inhaled the humid Texas air, and looked toward the horizon where power lines traced the sky. 30 years ago, darkness had concealed a crime. Now light threatened to expose it. Whether that light would reveal the full truth, or merely cast longer shadows, remained uncertain, and in that uncertainty, the echo of 1988 pulsed louder than ever. The courtroom overflowed before the sun had fully risen, camera crews staking their ground like hunters waiting for movement, microphones thrust forward, whispers colliding in tight hallways that smelled of old wood and tension. Thomas Kessler walked in wearing a pressed gray suit, wrists cuffed, posture rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead as if the crowd were invisible, as if the name Melissa Carter meant nothing more than ink on paper. Outside, headlines rolled in relentless waves. Texas 1988 cold case cracked. Retired detective's tip leads to arrest. But inside that room the air felt brittle, fragile, like it could splinter at any moment under the weight of 3 decades of unanswered questions. Prosecutors laid out the spine of their argument without flourish. Kessler had specialized knowledge of electrical infrastructure. A transformer near the victim's home showed signs of deliberate tampering. His employment placed him in the area. DNA from cigarette butts found near the fence line matched him with a statistical probability that could not be dismissed as coincidence. It was clean on paper, almost elegant. But absence still loomed. No body, no direct eyewitness, no confession. The defense seized on that vacuum immediately, attacking the partial DNA profile, questioning degradation, contamination, chain of custody stretching back to an era when evidence rooms relied more on instinct than standardized protocols. Harold Boone sat in the gallery, hands folded, gaze steady. He had imagined this day countless times, yet reality felt less triumphant and more volatile. Justice, he understood, is rarely cinematic. It is procedural, grinding, vulnerable to doubt. And doubt was already circling. During a recess, reporters pressed for comment. Ellis kept his answers measured. "The evidence speaks," he said. But evidence does not speak loudly. It whispers, it implies, it suggests. And suggestion is not the same as certainty. Inside the interrogation footage played for the court, Kessler appeared composed, almost detached. When confronted with the DNA match, he leaned back slightly, exhaled, and said, "People smoked everywhere back then. You're building a story out of dust." The phrase stuck, building a story out of dust, as if he understood that time had eroded more than memory, that it had softened edges investigators now struggled to sharpen again. Meanwhile, detectives revisited Kessler's past with renewed aggression. Former coworkers were tracked down across state lines. One remembered him as quiet, technically skilled, sometimes prone to disappearing during shifts without explanation. Another recalled a strange comment made after Melissa's disappearance. Power outages can hide a lot of things, but memory wavered under cross-examination. The witness, admitting he could not be certain of the timing, could not swear under oath that the remark was connected. 30 years distort context. 30 years blur intent. A forensics specialist testified about the transformer damage. Fresh scratches on bolts inconsistent with storm debris. Tool markings that suggested deliberate loosening. The defense countered with alternative explanations: vandalism, routine maintenance, animal interference. Each theory chipped at clarity, turning what once felt like a breakthrough into a contested battlefield of probabilities. Then came the search warrant executed on Kessler's property. Detectives had seized old tools, journals, boxes of utility manuals, and a locked metal trunk discovered in his garage attic. The trunk became a focal point of media speculation. When opened under controlled conditions, it revealed nothing overtly incriminating: faded work gloves, outdated maps, personal letters, photographs of fishing trips. No trophies. No hidden artifacts tied to Melissa Carter. The absence was almost louder than discovery would have been. But buried among the papers was a folded, yellowed map of Montgomery County from 1988, corners worn thin. Certain rural roads were circled in red ink. Highway 105 was one of them. Prosecutors introduced it as potential reconnaissance, a predator mapping isolation. The defense argued it was part of routine work planning. The jury watched, faces unreadable. Outside the courthouse, the Carter family statement was read aloud by an attorney. Melissa's mother, voice trembling, said they had waited half a lifetime for accountability. "We may never know where our daughter is," she wrote, "but we refuse to let her name fade into silence." The words rippled through the crowd, reigniting emotion that had simmered quietly for decades. Inside, Boone requested one more forensic push: a re-examination of soil samples collected from Kessler's truck during the recent search. Advanced geochemical analysis could potentially link soil composition to the Trinity River bank where the scarf had once been found. It was a long shot, threading fragments across time and geography, but long shots had carried the case this far. Days later, preliminary findings suggested a partial consistency between trace minerals in the truck bed and sediment near the river site. Not definitive, not exclusive, but consistent. The prosecution added it to their growing mosaic, a pattern forming from disparate shards. Kessler's demeanor began to shift subtly as testimony accumulated. A tightening around the eyes. A slower response cadence. During one session, when shown the photograph of the bedroom window forced open from the outside, he stared at it a fraction too long. Boone noticed. So did the jury. Yet when given the opportunity to speak, Kessler remained resolute. "I didn't take her," he said, voice calm but edged with fatigue. "You're chasing a ghost because you want closure." The statement landed heavily. Closure. The word echoed like a challenge. Was this about truth, or about satisfying a narrative that demanded resolution? As the trial progressed, an unexpected development surfaced. A woman from a neighboring county contacted investigators, claiming that in 1987 she had experienced a break-in attempt eerily similar to Melissa's case: power flicker, window forced, a man retreating when her dog began barking. She had reported it at the time, but no suspect was identified. When shown a recent photograph of Kessler, she hesitated, then said, "It could be him." Not certainty, not identification beyond doubt, but enough to widen the lens, to suggest a pattern of predatory rehearsal before a single catastrophic success. The defense moved to exclude her testimony, arguing unreliability and prejudice. The judge allowed limited inclusion. The jury listened, absorbing the implication that Melissa might not have been an isolated target but part of an escalation. Night after night, the town buzzed with speculation. At diners and gas stations, conversations circled the same axis. Did he do it? How could he have lived among us for so long? Or was this a desperate attempt to close a file that refused to die? The tension was palpable, a collective heartbeat syncing with courtroom proceedings. Then the soil analysis update arrived, more precise this time. Microscopic pollen grains embedded in debris from Kessler's truck matched a rare plant species clustered along a narrow stretch of the Trinity River bank, within half a mile of where the scarf had been discovered decades earlier. The odds of random coincidence narrowed significantly. Prosecutors prepared to present it as connective tissue between the disappearance and a potential disposal site. Boone felt the weight of the years pressed down harder than ever. The evidence was circumstantial in isolation, but together it formed a tightening circle. Transformer tampering, DNA at the fence, employment proximity, county map markings, soil and pollen correlation, a pattern of attempted break-ins. Each piece alone could be explained away. Together they painted a silhouette that looked unmistakably human. Still, one void remained: Melissa herself. Without remains, the narrative lacked finality. The river had shifted course multiple times since 1988. Floods had redrawn its banks, swallowed land, deposited silt layers thick enough to bury history. If she had been placed there, recovery would be nearly impossible. And if she had been taken elsewhere, that location might have vanished beneath development or wilderness alike. As closing arguments approached, the courtroom air felt electric, charged with anticipation and dread. Prosecutors spoke of planning, of knowledge abused, of darkness engineered to conceal violence. The defense spoke of reasonable doubt, of evidence stretched thin across decades, of a man transformed into a villain by retrospective interpretation. Boone watched the jury carefully. Some faces hardened. Others remained uncertain. Justice balanced precariously on interpretation. When the judge instructed deliberation, silence fell like a curtain. Outside, reporters paced. Cameras waited. Families clutched hands. The town braced for a verdict that would either cement belief or fracture it anew. Hours passed, and in that waiting, in that suspended breath between accusation and resolution, the true weight of a cold case revealed itself, not merely a mystery to be solved, but a wound that had shaped lives, redirected futures, and lingered in every flicker of a porch light for 30 years. Whatever the jury decided, one truth remained immutable: the night Melissa Carter vanished had never truly ended. It had simply stretched forward, year after year, binding everyone involved to a moment of darkness that refused to release its grip. The jury returned just before dusk, faces pale beneath fluorescent lights, eyes avoiding the gallery as if contact might ignite something irreversible. The courtroom rose in unison. Thomas Kessler stood, shoulders squared, expression carved from stone. The clerk's voice trembled slightly as the first word broke the silence. On the charge of kidnapping in connection with the disappearance of Melissa Carter, we find the defendant. A pause long enough to fracture breath. Guilty. The word detonated quietly, not with cheers but with a low, stunned exhale that rippled through the benches. Melissa's mother collapsed into her husband's arms. Reporters bolted for the doors, fingers already flying across screens. Guilty. Texas 1988 cold case cracked. Retired detective's tip leads to arrest. The headlines wrote themselves in real time. But the second charge, murder, hung heavier. On the charge of murder. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind that stretches nerves to breaking. Not guilty. The air shifted violently. Half the room froze. Half deflated. A split verdict. Accountability, without finality. Kidnapping proven. Murder unproven. The body still missing. The river still silent. Kessler did not react outwardly. A blink. A tightening of the jaw. Then stillness again. Sentencing would follow. Decades behind bars for kidnapping alone. But the absence of a murder conviction left a cavern where certainty should have been. Melissa Carter was still legally classified as missing, presumed dead, but not declared murdered by this jury. The law had spoken, but only partially. Outside the courthouse, chaos ignited. Cameras swarmed. Microphones collided. Justice served, one reporter shouted. Is this closure? Another demanded. Boone stepped past them without answering. Closure was not a verdict. Closure was a location, a set of remains, a grave marked with certainty. This was something else. This was accountability wrapped in ambiguity. Inside a holding room, Kessler finally spoke without prompting. "You built a puzzle and forced the pieces to fit," he murmured to his attorney. "But you still don't know where she is." The statement drifted down the hallway and landed like a taunt. The sentencing phase moved quickly. Prosecutors painted the kidnapping as calculated, predatory, deliberate in its orchestration. The transformer tampering became central again, a symbol of premeditation. Darkness, weaponized. The defense argued age, lack of prior violent convictions, the absence of definitive proof of homicide. The judge listened impassive. 35 years. The sentence echoed. 35 years in state prison. For a man already in his 60s, it was effectively life. Applause broke out in the back rows before being silenced. Melissa's parents wept openly now, relief tangled with grief that had never diminished. But outside the legal frame, one question continued to pulse. Where is she? Within weeks of sentencing, investigators intensified efforts to extract a confession. They approached Kessler with leverage, comfort privileges, potential recommendations for facility placement, even the possibility of revisiting the murder charge if new evidence surfaced. He declined every offer with the same measured tone. "There's nothing to confess," he repeated. "You already decided what happened." Boone visited him once more in prison. The meeting room was sterile, divided by thick glass. Kessler appeared thinner, gray hair clipped short, eyes sharper than expected. Time had not softened him. Boone sat opposite, phone pressed to his ear. "You cut the power," Boone said quietly. Kessler's lips twitched faintly. "You proved I was there. You planned it. You proved I worked nearby." Boone leaned closer. "She fought, didn't she?" A flicker, barely visible, but it was there. A tremor beneath composure. "You don't know anything about that night," Kessler said. The phrase struck Boone as curious, not denial of presence, but denial of knowledge. That night. Ownership embedded unconsciously. Boone let silence expand, heavy and deliberate. "Her family deserves a grave," he said. Kessler's gaze drifted past him, toward some point beyond concrete walls. "Families deserve a lot of things," he replied, then ended the conversation by hanging up the receiver. The Trinity River was searched again that summer, drones scanning from above, divers descending into murky currents. Sonar pings revealed debris, shopping carts, rusted barrels, old tires, but no human remains. Flood maps from the late 1980s were analyzed, modeling how a body might have traveled, where sediment could have buried it. Each simulation ended in uncertainty. Nature had rewritten the terrain too many times. Meanwhile, a new tip surfaced from within the prison system. An inmate claimed Kessler had spoken in coded fragments about the oak tree that never fell. Investigators traced the phrase back to his former property. The large oak near the shed had indeed been removed in 2001 after storm damage. Soil beneath its former root system was re-examined. Ground-penetrating radar once more swept the area. Excavation followed. Nothing. The oak tree had concealed nothing but roots and stone. Media attention began to wane again. Another case, another spectacle, took its place in the cycle. Yet in Montgomery County, the impact lingered. Parents reminded children to lock windows. Porch lights were replaced with motion sensors. The idea that someone could manipulate darkness so easily had left a scar deeper than fear. It had eroded trust in the ordinary. Boone retired fully this time, no longer unofficially consulting, no longer chasing loose threads. But sleep did not come easily. In dreams, he saw the bedroom window again, rain slicing through the frame, a shadow crossing the threshold. He imagined the struggle, brief, chaotic, desperate. He imagined Melissa seeing her attacker clearly in the flash of lightning, memorizing his face even as she was overpowered. And he imagined the drive that followed, tires rolling over gravel, the hum of an engine fading into rural emptiness. The guilty verdict had answered one question: who likely took her? But it had not answered the final one. What exactly happened after the door closed? Years passed inside prison walls. Kessler filed appeals, each denied. The DNA evidence held. The transformer tampering stood. The circumstantial mosaic remained intact under scrutiny. Yet he never confessed, never volunteered a location, never allowed investigators the final piece. Melissa Carter remained, in official language, a missing person. On the 35th anniversary of her disappearance, the local paper ran another retrospective. A single line stood out: "Justice without recovery leaves a hollow space." The phrase captured the town's mood perfectly. The case was cracked, yes. An arrest made. A conviction secured. But resolution? That was more elusive. One evening, long after the headlines had faded, Boone received a letter postmarked from the prison. No return name beyond an inmate number he recognized instantly. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside, a single sentence written in tight, deliberate script. "You were right about the power." No signature. No elaboration. Boone read it twice. 3 times. The words confirmed what the jury had believed, what the evidence had implied. But they offered nothing beyond acknowledgement. Not remorse. Not location. Just confirmation that the darkness that night had been engineered. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Outside, the Texas sky stretched wide and indifferent once more. Power lines cut across the horizon, humming quietly in the fading light. The farmhouse on Highway 105 stood renovated, peaceful, as if history could be painted over. But beneath that calm surface, beneath decades of dust and court transcripts and sealed evidence bags, one truth endured. On a storm-soaked night in 1988, someone had reached into the infrastructure of a small town and twisted it just enough to make the lights go out. And in that brief, manufactured darkness, a life vanished. The arrest had cracked the cold case. The verdict had delivered a measure of justice. Yet the river still moved in silence, carrying secrets downstream and somewhere beneath shifting sediment, or perhaps in a place never searched at all, the final answer waited, unspoken, unresolved, and haunting as ever. The letter should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like a door opening just enough to reveal a deeper corridor of darkness. "You were right about the power." Harold Boone read the sentence again under the dim kitchen light, the paper trembling faintly in his hands. Confirmation without confession. Admission without consequence. It was as if Thomas Kessler needed Boone to know he had understood the method, but refused to surrender the rest. A final act of control. Control had always been the invisible thread in this case. Engineered blackout. Forced window. Cigarette left carelessly, or deliberately, near the fence line. A man confident enough to manipulate infrastructure, confident enough to believe he would never be traced. In 1988, he had been right. For decades, he had been right. Boone drove to the prison 2 days later. This time, Kessler did not avoid eye contact. He seemed almost expectant. The glass between them reflected 2 aging men tethered to the same night. "You sent the letter," Boone said. Kessler tilted his head slightly. "I thought you'd appreciate accuracy." "Accuracy isn't enough," Boone replied. "Where is she?" A pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. "You think knowing that changes anything?" Kessler asked quietly. "It changes everything." Kessler leaned back. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. "You build a case on fragments," he said. "On inference. On patterns. And you were clever enough to make it stick. But you still don't understand the whole story." Boone felt the old surge of frustration, sharp and immediate. "Then explain it." Kessler's gaze drifted downward, as if replaying a memory he had guarded for too long. "Storms distort sound," he said. "Did you know that? Thunder masks footsteps. Wind swallows screams." His eyes lifted again. "People think evil announces itself. It doesn't. It blends in." "That's not an answer." "It's all you're getting." The guard's signaled time was nearly up. Boone leaned closer to the glass. "You cut the power because you wanted her disoriented. You wanted isolation." Kessler's lips curved faintly. Darkness simplifies things. The visit ended there. Outside the prison walls, Boone sat in his car for nearly an hour, engine off, heat building inside the cabin. Darkness simplifies things. The phrase echoed like a blueprint. The blackout had not just concealed the abduction, it had disoriented the victim, erased witnesses, disrupted phone lines, eliminated silhouettes. It was more than concealment. It was strategy. Back at the sheriff's office, Ellis listened carefully as Boone recounted the conversation. "He's enjoying this," Ellis muttered. "He wants us chasing words." "Then we chase them," Boone replied. They revisited every storm report from that week in 1988. Wind speeds. Lightning strikes. Emergency calls logged within a 10-mile radius. One anomaly surfaced, a 911 hang-up call placed from a payphone near a defunct gas station 3 miles east of Melissa's farmhouse, time-stamped just after midnight. At the time, it had been dismissed as a misdial. No voice, no follow-up. The gas station had since been demolished, replaced by a storage facility. 3 miles east. In the original timeline, investigators had focused primarily west toward the Trinity River, guided by the scarf discovery. But if the abductor had driven east first, toward that payphone, the geography shifted. Old maps were spread across conference tables once more. Rural backroads that existed in 1988 but no longer appeared on current GPS systems were highlighted. One dirt road branched off near the old gas station and cut toward a stretch of undeveloped woodland that had since become part of a private ranch. Boone felt it immediately, that tightening in his chest that had accompanied every major breakthrough in his career. Not certainty, but alignment. A warrant was requested to survey the ranch property, justified by the historical connection and the inmates' recent correspondence implying withheld knowledge. The landowner resisted at first, wary of media intrusion, but ultimately cooperated after private assurances. Ground-penetrating radar units were deployed across a narrow clearing near the remnants of the old dirt road. Cadaver dogs circled methodically, noses low, handlers tense. Then one dog stopped. A sharp alert. Focused. Persistent. Excavation began under controlled conditions. Shovels cut through layers of compacted earth, roots tangled like veins. 10 inches down, nothing. 20 inches, still soil. 30 inches, fragments of fabric emerged, faded beyond recognition. The digging slowed. A bone surfaced. Silence fell heavy and immediate. Every movement became deliberate, reverent. Forensic anthropologists were called to the scene. The remains were partial, fragmented by time and moisture, but undeniably human. Boone stood at the edge of the clearing, heart pounding not with triumph, but with something deeper, heavier. The earth had finally answered. Dental records would take days to confirm identity. The media caught wind within hours. Breaking news banners exploded across screens once more. Remains discovered in 1988 Texas cold case. Community stunned again. In prison, Kessler was informed of the discovery. Witnesses later described his reaction as minimal. A blink. A slow exhale. No visible shock. No denial. When Boone requested another meeting, Kessler agreed. "You moved her," Boone said through the glass. "You didn't leave her by the river." Kessler's expression was unreadable. "Rivers change," he replied. "Land doesn't. You thought we'd never look east. I thought you'd stop looking altogether." Boone's jaw tightened. Why there? For the first time, something flickered across Kessler's face that resembled fatigue rather than control. "Because it was quiet," he said. "Because no one builds memories in places like that." The confirmation was not formal, not recorded as a confession. But it was enough. Days later, forensic results confirmed what everyone already knew. The remains belonged to Melissa Carter. 35 years after she vanished, she was found. The town gathered for a vigil the night the confirmation was announced. Candles lined the courthouse steps. Names were spoken softly. Melissa's photograph, no longer grainy, restored digitally, glowed on a large screen. Her parents stood together, grief etched deep but steadied now by the presence of something tangible. A grave was prepared. Closure, long abstract, had finally taken physical form. Yet even as the community mourned with renewed intensity, a question lingered in the shadows. What exactly had happened between the blackout and the burial? The autopsy could not answer fully. Time had erased too much. Cause of death remained undetermined, though trauma indicators suggested violence consistent with the prosecution's theory. The murder charge, once acquitted, could not be retried due to double jeopardy. Legally, the chapter was closed. Emotionally, it was not. Boone attended the funeral quietly, standing at the back beneath a wide Texas sky. As the casket lowered into the ground, he felt neither victory nor relief, only the weight of years collapsing into a single moment. Darkness had simplified things for the man who orchestrated it. But light, slow, persistent, relentless, had eventually undone him. The cold case had been cracked. An arrest made. A conviction secured. Remains recovered. And yet, as Boone drove past the old stretch of Highway 105 one last time, he glanced at the power lines humming overhead and understood something unsettling. For 35 years, the truth had not been buried by brilliance. It had been buried by time. And time, no matter how powerful, always leaves traces. The funeral should have marked an ending. Instead, it reopened the night. Rain fell lightly as Melissa Carter was laid to rest, not the violent storm of 1988, but a soft, steady drizzle that seemed almost deliberate, as if the sky itself remembered. Cameras stayed at a respectful distance. The crowd was smaller now. Age and time had thinned it, but those who came stood with rigid stillness, faces lined not just by grief, but by decades of suspended questions. A grave changes the atmosphere of a case. Absence becomes presence. Speculation becomes soil and stone. Yet for Harold Boone, something still felt unfinished. Because Thomas Kessler had never described the sequence. He had acknowledged the power. He had implied the location. But he had never spoken of the struggle, never described the drive, never admitted the final act. Control, always control. Even in prison, even facing mortality, he rationed truth like currency. 2 weeks after the burial, Boone received another letter. No greeting. No signature. You found what you were meant to find. The phrasing sent a chill through him. Meant to. As if the discovery had been orchestrated. As if the eastward shift had been anticipated. Boone read the line repeatedly, dissecting intent. Was Kessler suggesting the burial site had not been the original one? That the remains had been moved? Boone drove straight to Ellis. They reopened the site reports, scrutinizing soil stratification. The burial depth was consistent with a shallow grave dug in haste, but there were anomalies, subtle layering differences suggesting the earth had been disturbed more than once. Forensic notes mentioned compacted sediment beneath the remains, older than the surrounding soil. It could mean nothing, or it could mean everything. If the body had been relocated, why? They revisited Kessler's timeline in the years after 1988. In 1991, he had been cited for trespassing on private land east of town, the same ranch property where Melissa's remains were eventually found. The citation had seemed minor at the time. Now it glowed like a warning flare. What if the original burial had been elsewhere? What if the eastward site was a secondary concealment? Boone requested another excavation at the ranch, expanding the search radius. Cadaver dogs were redeployed. Ground scans extended beyond the initial clearing. Days passed with no new alerts. But then, near the edge of a dried creek bed, a dog reacted sharply again. The excavation uncovered nothing human this time, just remnants of old rope fibers and a rusted metal clasp. The items were bagged, cataloged. The rope fibers were degraded beyond definitive dating, but the clasp style matched hardware commonly sold in the late 1980s. It suggested preparation. It suggested equipment. It suggested that Melissa's abduction may not have been spontaneous opportunity, but pre-assembled intent. When confronted again, Kessler listened impassively. You moved her once, Boone said. Silence. You didn't expect development near the gas station. You panicked. Kessler's fingers twitched slightly on the metal table. Land changes, he said quietly. People get curious. Where was she first? Kessler leaned forward for the first time in months. His voice lowered, almost intimate. You think it matters now? It matters to history. A faint smile. History doesn't care about details. It cares about outcomes. The guard ended the session. Back outside, Boone felt a growing unease. If there had been a first burial site, it remained undiscovered. And if Kessler had moved the body years later, that meant he had revisited the crime, physically returned to it, long after media attention faded. Which meant the obsession had not been one-sided. Investigators pulled satellite archives, grainy images from the early 1990s. Comparing vegetation patterns and ground disturbances was imprecise, but one image from 1992 showed a faint rectangular discoloration in a wooded lot west of Highway 105, property that had since been developed into a residential subdivision. Homes now stood where trees once crowded together. The realization landed heavy. If the original burial site had been there, excavation would mean tearing through private property, foundations, families who had no connection to the crime. Legally possible. Socially explosive. Ellis hesitated. We already have her remains, he said carefully. We have a conviction. What are we looking for? The truth, Boone replied. Because something still didn't align. The autopsy on the recovered remains had shown fractures inconsistent with a simple assault. There were indications of restraint, possible blunt force trauma, but the degree of decomposition blurred precision. If there had been movement, transport, relocation, it could explain certain inconsistencies in bone positioning noted during recovery. Boone couldn't shake the feeling that the eastward site had been chosen not for initial concealment, but for permanence. A second letter arrived a month later. Storms return. So do memories. No context. No elaboration. Boone began studying weather archives from the early 1990s. In October 1992, a severe storm system had torn through Montgomery County, causing localized flooding and minor structural damage. Records showed emergency utility crews dispatched to multiple transformer sites, including one near the wooded lot west of Highway 105. Kessler had been subcontracted during that period. The pattern crystallized. He had likely buried Melissa west of her home initially. Years later, fearing development or accidental discovery during infrastructure maintenance, he used a storm, another cover of chaos, to exhume and relocate her east to the ranch property. Darkness simplifies things. Storms distort sound. The repetition of environmental camouflage was not coincidence. It was methodology. Boone presented the theory to Ellis. The room fell quiet. You're saying he returned to the grave, Ellis murmured. Yes. And no one noticed. Boone met his gaze. That's the point. If proven, it would not change the sentence. It would not reopen the murder charge. But it would expose the full scope of premeditation, the calculated nature of concealment spanning years. A discreet ground survey was conducted beneath one home in the subdivision, with the owner's reluctant consent after being briefed privately. Radar showed soil disruption beneath a section of backyard near an old oak stump long removed. Excavation was limited, careful. Fragments of disturbed earth were found, but no remains, only residual soil compression consistent with prior excavation decades earlier. The implication was chilling. Melissa Carter had been buried there first. A quiet suburban lawn had once held her. Boone stood at the edge of that yard, children's bicycles leaning against a fence, wind chimes rattling softly overhead. The present layered over the past, so seamlessly it felt unreal. Kessler had not simply committed a crime. He had maintained it. He had curated concealment across years, returning under cover of storms to adjust the narrative geography of his own violence. When Boone confronted him one final time with the evidence of dual sites, Kessler did not deny it. You think moving bones makes you powerful? Boone asked. Kessler's voice was almost weary now. No, he said. It makes you careful. Why go back? A long silence. Because I couldn't sleep, Kessler admitted quietly. Not from guilt, from risk. The admission landed harder than any confession of remorse could have. Risk, not regret, had driven him back to the grave. Boone left the prison knowing he would never extract empathy from this man. Only fragments. Only tactical acknowledgments. The cold case had been cracked. The body found. The conviction secured. The burial sites uncovered. But the deeper truth, the psychology of calculated darkness, of storms weaponized twice, of a man who revisited his crime not to mourn but to manage exposure, would linger far beyond legal closure. In Montgomery County, life continued. Subdivisions expanded. Power lines hummed steadily overhead. Children played beneath skies that had once hidden violence. Yet when storms roll in now, when transformers pop and lights flicker for just a second too long, some residents still pause. Because they remember. They remember that on a night in 1988, darkness wasn't an accident. It was engineered. And even decades later, the echo of that engineered silence still moves like distant thunder across the Texas sky. The second burial site changed everything. Not legally. Not procedurally. Thomas Kessler would die behind bars regardless. But psychologically, the revelation that he had returned to the grave years later, under cover of another storm, beneath the same manipulated darkness he once weaponized, shifted the entire narrative from a single violent act to a prolonged campaign of concealment. He hadn't just committed a crime. He had maintained it. The subdivision west of Highway 105 grew quieter after investigators finished their discreet excavation. Official statements were measured, vague, careful not to ignite panic. Residents were told there had once been historical soil disturbance in the area tied to a decades-old case, now resolved. Most accepted the explanation. Some didn't sleep well for weeks. Boone stood on that lawn again one evening, long after the news crews had moved on. The grass had been restored. Fresh sod laid over old scars. The wind moved softly through nearby trees. It was impossible to reconcile the serenity with the image in his mind. Kessler digging through mud in 1992, rain pounding down, headlights cut off, working quickly, methodically, lifting bones from earth that had already hidden them for 4 years. He had risked everything, which meant he had been watching development patterns, monitoring construction permits, following news about expanding infrastructure. It wasn't panic. It was surveillance. Back at the office, Ellis pulled archived county planning documents from the early 90s. Subdivision proposals, zoning adjustments, public notices printed in small-town newspapers. The wooded lot west of Highway 105 had been flagged for future residential development as early as 1991. Kessler would have seen that. He worked utilities. He tracked land use. He understood where cables would run, where trenches would be dug. He knew excavation would eventually expose the first grave. So he returned. Not because of remorse. Because of foresight. The psychological profile sharpened. This wasn't an impulsive predator spiraling out of control. This was someone who calculated long-term risk. Someone who integrated crime into routine life, without visible fracture. Boone requested a deeper dive into Kessler's activities during October 1992, the week of the major storm system that masked the relocation. Utility dispatch logs showed Kessler assigned to emergency transformer repairs within a 5-mile radius of the wooded lot. He had legitimate reason to be on the roads at night. Flashing hazard lights. Official vehicle markings. No one questions a utility truck during a storm. Darkness simplifies things. The phrase no longer sounded metaphorical. It was operational doctrine. Investigators re-examined fuel purchase receipts from that period, paper records scanned into brittle microfilm. One receipt placed Kessler's truck at a gas station east of town at 3:14 a.m. on October 18, 1992, 3 hours after the heaviest rainfall. The timing aligned almost perfectly with soil layering estimates at the second burial site. He had exhumed her west, driven east, reburied her permanently. The precision of it settled heavily in Boone's chest. For 4 years, Melissa's remains had rested beneath trees not far from her home. For the next 31, she lay east, concealed in a clearing that almost no one had reason to enter. When confronted with the fuel receipt, Kessler didn't deny it. I worked nights during storms, he said evenly. That's when people needed power. You needed cover, Boone replied. Kessler's gaze sharpened slightly. You're romanticizing chaos, he said. Storms are practical. Practical. The word echoed like an indictment of human detachment. Meanwhile, forensic reanalysis of the remains continued. With confirmation of relocation, specialists re-examined bone trauma for indications of post-mortem disturbance. Microfractures along the rib cage suggested handling consistent with exhumation tools. Soil compaction patterns indicated the body had not decomposed fully before being moved, meaning Kessler likely returned within a few years of the initial burial, not decades later. He had not waited long. He had monitored risk early. That detail unsettled even seasoned investigators. It meant that in the early 90s, while the community was still holding candlelight vigils and posting missing person flyers, Kessler was quietly revisiting the grave, not to grieve but to manage exposure. Melissa's parents were informed of the relocation theory privately. The news reopened wounds that had barely begun to scar. Knowing she had been moved, handled again, added a layer of violation beyond the original crime. But they remained composed in public statements, focusing instead on gratitude that she had finally been found. Boone admired their restraint. He did not feel it himself. He requested one final psychological evaluation of Kessler, conducted within prison by a forensic behavioral analyst. The findings were stark: high-functioning, emotionally compartmentalized, minimal empathy indicators, strong need for environmental control, low reactivity under confrontation. No evidence of delusion. No impulsive psychopathy. Simply calculated detachment. The analyst wrote one line that lingered. Subject demonstrates sustained cognitive engagement with the crime long after commission, suggesting maintenance of internal narrative control. Internal narrative control. Kessler had curated his version of events privately for decades. The blackout, the abduction, the burial, the relocation. Each phase executed with deliberate structure. Even now, withholding full confession allowed him to dictate the boundaries of truth. Boone visited him once more, not for evidence, but for understanding. You went back because you were afraid, Boone said through the glass. Kessler shook his head slowly.
No.
I went back because loose ends irritate me. She wasn't a loose end. She was a liability. The coldness of the statement hit harder than any outburst could have. Boone stared at him. Did you ever think about her as a person? Kessler's eyes narrowed slightly. Thinking complicates things, and darkness simplifies them. Boone pressed. A faint nod. The guard announced time. As Boone stood to leave, Kessler spoke again, almost casually. You know what bothers you the most, he said. Not that I did it. Not even that I moved her. It's that I adapted. The word lingered. Adapted. Boone walked out without responding. Outside, the Texas sky stretched wide and deceptively calm. Development continued west of Highway 105. East, the ranchland remained mostly untouched. Two landscapes forever connected by one man's calculated movement through storms. The case file, once thick with speculation, now held confirmed chapters: engineered blackout, targeted abduction, initial burial west, storm-masked relocation east, eventual recovery decades later. Cold case cracked. Arrest secured. Conviction delivered. Remains recovered. Dual burial sites confirmed. Yet the emotional architecture of the crime, its sustained management, its strategic adaptation, left a deeper imprint than the legal milestones ever could. In town, people began telling the story differently. Not just about a missing schoolteacher. Not just about a utility worker who cut power to hide violence. But about how darkness, when engineered carefully enough, can persist for years beneath ordinary life. When storms roll through Montgomery County now, transformers still pop occasionally. Lights flicker. For a split second, everything goes black. And in that brief manufactured silence, some remember that once, long ago, someone used that same silence not just to commit a crime, but to maintain it. The case should have settled into history after the second burial site was confirmed. Instead, it deepened. Because once investigators understood that Thomas Kessler had adapted, had monitored development, returned under cover of storms, relocated remains with precision, the question shifted from what he did to how long he had been preparing to do it. Preparation leaves rehearsal. And rehearsal leaves traces. Ellis ordered a comprehensive review of unsolved break-ins, attempted abductions, and unexplained power disruptions across Montgomery County and neighboring jurisdictions between 1985 and 1993. The data pool was messy: paper archives, faded microfilm, handwritten dispatch logs, but patterns began to surface. 5 reported incidents involved nighttime power flickers preceding attempted entries through windows. In 3 of those cases, victims described hearing metallic sounds near exterior walls moments before electricity cut out. In all 5, the offender fled when resistance or noise disrupted the approach. None had been conclusively linked. Until now. When cross-referenced with utility work schedules, Kessler's assignments overlapped geographically with 3 of the 5 locations within a 2-week window of each event. The alignment was no longer coincidence. It was escalation. Melissa Carter had not been random. She had been the culmination of repeated testing, failed attempts refined over time until conditions were optimal. Boone felt the weight of that realization settle like lead. Melissa had not simply been targeted. She had been studied. The blackout was not innovation in the moment. It was iteration perfected. Prison authorities were notified of the expanding investigative scope. Kessler's demeanor reportedly shifted subtly in the following weeks. Guards described increased pacing, longer silences, a noticeable tightening when mail was delivered. Another letter arrived at Boone's home. "You're digging where nothing grows." No signature. The tone had changed. Less detached. More defensive. Boone drove to the prison again unannounced. "You tried before her," Boone said without preamble once seated across the glass. Kessler didn't respond. 3 houses. Same flicker. Same metallic sound. Silence. "You were practicing." Kessler's jaw tightened slightly. "You're building ghosts." "No," Boone replied evenly. "I'm mapping behavior." A long pause stretched between them. "You think repetition makes it worse?" Kessler asked quietly. "It makes it intentional." The faintest shift in breathing. "You only caught one," Kessler said. The statement hung in the air like a dropped blade. "Only caught one." Boone leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Kessler looked directly at him now, expression unreadable. "It means your narrative is comfortable," he said. "One victim. One monster. One resolution. People sleep better that way." The implication was chilling. Ellis convened a multi-county task force within days. Cold cases involving unexplained disappearances between 1986 and 1992 were reopened for cross-analysis. Missing women. Rural residences. Reports involving temporary outages or tampered electrical panels. 2 names emerged quickly. Angela Ruiz, missing 1987, last seen in a town 40 miles north. No signs of forced entry, but neighbors reported lights flickering that night during clear weather. Denise Holloway, 1990, reported an attempted break-in weeks before vanishing. Utility company logged minor transformer anomaly. In her area, the evening she disappeared. Kessler had subcontracted in both counties during those years. The air inside the investigation unit thickened with dread. Had they uncovered not just a single cold case cracked, but the edge of something larger, something that had remained invisible precisely because each fragment appeared isolated? Search warrants were requested for archived evidence in both cases. Old cigarette butts, hair samples, soil traces. Most had degraded beyond usefulness. But technology had evolved again. Touch DNA recovery now possible on items previously deemed too contaminated. Weeks passed in a blur of forensic processing. Then the call came. Partial DNA recovered from a preserved evidence envelope in the Ruiz case, originally dismissed as contamination, matched Kessler's profile within statistical margins comparable to Melissa's case. Not conclusive beyond doubt, but devastatingly consistent. Boone visited Kessler again, this time with the Ruiz file in hand. "You remember her?" Boone asked, sliding the photograph toward the glass. Kessler didn't look at it immediately. "That's not my case," he said. "Your DNA says otherwise." A flicker, there it was again. Not panic. Calculation recalibrating. "You're reaching," Kessler said quietly. "Am I?" Silence. "You think finding patterns gives you control," Kessler continued. "It doesn't." "No," Boone replied. "But it gives families answers." Kessler's gaze dropped to the table. His fingers tapped once, twice, then stilled. "You can't reopen everything," he said. "Watch me." The psychological shift was unmistakable now. The man who once radiated cold detachment was beginning to show strain, not emotional remorse, but structural stress. His internal narrative, meticulously compartmentalized, was being expanded without his consent. The Ruiz family was notified cautiously. Hope mixed with horror. The possibility that their missing daughter had not vanished into abstraction but intersected with a confirmed predator reopened wounds long calcified. Meanwhile, excavation began near a remote utility access corridor north of town, an area Kessler had serviced repeatedly in 1987. Cadaver dogs swept the perimeter. Radar scanned beneath thick brush. On the third day, an alert. Excavation revealed disturbed soil, but no remains. Only remnants of old tarp material and corroded fasteners similar to the clasp recovered at Melissa's secondary site. Preparation. Transport. Concealment. But no body. The pattern was unmistakable. Kessler had likely refined his relocation technique after Ruiz, adjusting burial depth, distance, and environmental masking. He had learned. And learning implies repetition. Public awareness surged again as media outlets connected the dots. Texas 1988 cold case expands. Investigators probe potential additional victims. The narrative shifted from closure to reckoning. In prison, Kessler reportedly requested fewer recreational periods. He declined interviews. Letters ceased. Control was slipping. Boone sat alone one evening reviewing timelines layered across a wall-sized map. Pins marked blackout reports. Circles traced Kessler's service routes. Arrows indicated burial sites, known and suspected. The geometry of it was terrifyingly logical. Storm corridors. Utility dispatch zones. Rural isolation. He had not simply used darkness. He had studied infrastructure. And infrastructure had shielded him. The realization carried a broader chill. How many crimes remain invisible because they are embedded within systems designed to serve? Boone knew the answer would never be precise. But the pattern now extended beyond Melissa Carter. Beyond a single engineered blackout. When he finally received another letter months later, it was shorter than the rest. "You wanted the full story. Careful what you uncover." No signature. No denial. Only warning. Outside, summer storms rolled across Montgomery County again. Transformers hummed steadily, monitored by modern grids and digital alerts far more advanced than anything available in 1988. But in the back of Boone's mind, one truth refused to quiet. The night Melissa vanished was not an anomaly. It was a threshold. And now, decades later, the light shining into that darkness was revealing that the silence had never belonged to just one storm. The first time the town heard the word reconstruction, it sounded almost hopeful. It came from a press conference held beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the county building, a place that had seen decades of routine paperwork and minor disputes, but very few headlines. The sheriff stood stiff behind the podium, jaw tight, voice measured. He spoke about new forensic possibilities, about re-examining old materials, about a renewed commitment. He did not promise justice. He did not promise closure. He only said the case was active again. Active. In a town where time seemed to move slowly, that word detonated. Texas, 1988. A warm spring evening. Cicadas screaming in the trees. The kind of night where doors were left unlocked and neighbors waved from porches. And then the call. A young woman found lifeless inside her small house near the edge of town. No sign of forced entry. No clear motive. No obvious suspect. The headlines at the time were simple and raw. Local woman slain. Community in shock. Killer at large. They faded within weeks. But now, decades later, the phrase Texas 1988 cold case was back on television screens, printed in bold across digital news feeds, spoken in urgent tones by anchors who hadn't even been born when it happened. The re-examination began in a windowless evidence room. Dust-coated boxes labeled in fading ink were carried out like relics from a forgotten war. Inside, photographs developed on glossy paper, handwritten notes in looping script, cassette tapes containing interviews recorded on crackling devices long obsolete, and sealed plastic bags holding fragments of a life interrupted, fabric fibers, a broken earring clasp, a glass with a faint smudge. The retired detective had insisted something had been missed. He had said it quietly at first, over coffee, years after he left the force. He had told colleagues he could still see the scene when he closed his eyes. He had never believed the killer was a stranger passing through. He believed the answer was closer. Too close. Back in 1988, the tools were blunt. DNA analysis was in its infancy. Fingerprints were compared by eye. Timelines were built on witness memory and instinct. The investigation had moved fast at first, then slowed, then stalled. Interviews circled the same names. Alibis blurred. Rumors multiplied. Eventually, the case was shelved. Now, technicians in modern lab coats unsealed evidence with gloved hands and sterile instruments. They fed samples into machines that hummed softly, machines capable of reading microscopic codes invisible to investigators 3 decades earlier. And slowly, a pattern emerged. Not a full identity, not a name, but a partial genetic profile, male, consistent across 2 separate items recovered from the scene. It was enough to electrify the room. The town felt it before officials confirmed it. Word traveled fast through grocery store aisles, through church pews, across social media posts typed with shaking hands. New DNA found. Cold case breakthrough. Could this be it? For the victim's family, hope was complicated. Her sister had aged visibly in the years since 1988. Lines carved deep around her mouth, eyes wary. She had learned to live with absence. Learned to celebrate birthdays without candles. Learned to avoid certain streets. When investigators told her about the genetic profile, she listened in silence. "Does that mean you know who it is?" she asked. "Not yet," they said. The profile was entered into national databases. Cody's searches ran overnight. Matches were scanned, compared, dismissed. Nothing immediate. No direct hit. No obvious offender with a criminal record. But the science had evolved beyond direct matches. Genealogical tracing, an emerging technique that had begun solving other long-frozen crimes, was considered. Public ancestry databases. Family trees mapped backward through generations. A long, delicate process that could narrow suspects without a single eyewitness. The decision to pursue it was not made lightly. There were legal questions, privacy concerns, budget constraints. But there was also a name etched into a gravestone and a case file marked unsolved for 30 years. The green light was given. A specialist began building a family tree from distant genetic cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who had uploaded DNA kits to learn about heritage, unaware that their data might illuminate a crime buried in time. The tree branched outward like veins. Eventually it narrowed. A cluster of relatives connected to a family that had lived in the county in the late 1980s. A family with a son who had been 24 at the time of the murder. A man who had known the victim casually through mutual friends. A man who had never been formally charged with anything violent. He had moved away years ago. He was still alive. Detectives did not rush. They reopened old interview transcripts. They reread every statement the man had given in 1988. He had claimed he was home alone that night. He had said he barely knew her. He had appeared cooperative, even sympathetic. No hard evidence had tied him to the scene back then. Now, quietly, investigators began surveillance. They watched his routines. They collected discarded items, coffee cups, napkins, anything that might carry fresh DNA. They worked carefully, mindful that one misstep could alert him. The sample was tested. It matched. Not partially. Not ambiguously. It matched the profile extracted from the evidence box sealed 3 decades earlier. The room was silent when the confirmation came through. Texas 1988 cold case. Cracked. But an arrest would require more than science. It would require confronting a man who had lived 30 years as if nothing had happened. When detectives finally knocked on his door, he looked older than his file photo, hair thinner, shoulders slumped. He invited them inside, offered water, smiled politely. They did not smile back. They asked him if he remembered the victim. He said yes, vaguely. Tragic, he called it. Terrible what happened. They told him they had new evidence. His hands trembled slightly. They told him his DNA was found at the scene. Silence. He stared at the table, then at the wall, then back at them. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. Outside, neighbors watched from behind curtains, unaware that history was repeating itself inside that modest house. The interrogation stretched for hours. He denied it at first. Claimed contamination. Claimed mistakes. Claimed he must have visited her house days before, though earlier statements contradicted that. Detectives pressed gently, methodically, laying out timelines, inconsistencies, forensic facts. At some point, his composure cracked. He admitted being there. He admitted an argument. He admitted losing control. He did not call it murder. He called it a mistake. The arrest was made before sunset. The mugshot traveled faster than any headline in 1988 ever had. Social media erupted. Local stations interrupted programming. Texas 1988 cold case cracked. Retired detective's tip leads to arrest. The phrase looped again and again. The retired detective watched from his living room. He did not celebrate. He simply nodded once, as if confirming something he had always known. For the victim's family, the news landed like a thunderclap. There were tears. There was anger. There was a strange, hollow quiet that followed the first wave of emotion. Justice, after 30 years, felt surreal, almost abstract. The town gathered outside the courthouse on the day of the arraignment. Some out of curiosity, some out of solidarity, some because they needed to see with their own eyes that the ghost haunting their community had a face. He was led in wearing handcuffs. Older, smaller, human. Not a monster from rumor, but a man who had once stood in the same grocery lines, attended the same church services, shaken the same hands. That realization shook people more than any forensic detail, because it meant the danger had never been distant. It had lived among them. As legal proceedings began, reporters revisited the original crime scene. The house had long since been sold, renovated, repainted. New families had lived there, unaware of the history beneath the floorboards. Yet the air still felt heavy. In the courtroom, evidence was presented piece by piece. Photographs projected onto screens. Lab results explained in clinical terms. Old cassette interviews played aloud, voices from 1988 echoing into the present. Time folded in on itself. The retired detective was called to testify. His voice was steady, though age had softened it. He spoke about the initial investigation, about leads pursued and lost, about the one detail that had never sat right with him. He described how, years later, he had revisited his notes and realized a small inconsistency in the suspect's timeline. A detail everyone else had overlooked. It had been enough to push for the case to be reopened. When asked why he had not let it go, he paused. Because she deserved better, he said. The trial would take months. Appeals would follow. Legal arguments would dissect every scientific method used. But one fact remained immovable. The genetic code extracted from that evidence box tied the past to the present with ruthless precision. And the town, once fractured by fear, began a slow process of reckoning. The case had defined them in 1988. It defined them again now. But this time there was an ending. Not clean, not simple, but real. As night fell after the first day in court, Candles flickered outside the courthouse steps. The victim's name was spoken aloud by people who had never met her, by teenagers who had only heard the story secondhand, by elders who remembered the sirens that night as if they had sounded yesterday. Cold case. Cracked. Arrest made. Yet beneath the headlines, beneath the legal language and forensic triumph, there lingered a quieter truth. 30 years of unanswered questions cannot be erased in a single courtroom verdict. They leave scars. They leave silence. And sometimes, even when justice finally arrives, it does not roar. It whispers. The 10th morning of the trial broke under a sky the color of ash, low and heavy, as if even the weather understood that something long buried was being dragged into the light. Reporters lined the courthouse steps before sunrise, camera tripods scraping against concrete, microphones branded with network logos pointed toward doors that had not yet opened. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed, jurors filed in with guarded expressions, and the man at the center of a Texas 1988 cold case sat at the defense table, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed forward as though staring into a tunnel only he could see. The prosecution moved with precision now, no longer teasing fragments, but laying down a full narrative built from fragments resurrected across decades. A forensic analyst took the stand first, her voice calm, clinical, almost detached as she explained the journey of a single biological trace, how it had been collected in a chaotic living room in 1988, sealed in plastic, forgotten in storage, and then awakened by modern science. She described polymerase chain reactions, genetic markers, statistical probabilities, so astronomical they bordered on the incomprehensible. 1 in billions. A match beyond coincidence. The jurors leaned forward, pens still, as if the numbers themselves were gravity pulling them closer. On a large screen, a chart glowed in sterile blue, alleles lined up in symmetrical rows, the victim's profile on one side, the unknown male on the other, and finally the defendant's sample overlaying perfectly, like a ghost stepping into its own shadow. The defense objected to phrasing, to tone, to implications, but the data remained unmoved. It did not raise its voice. It did not dramatize. It simply existed, indifferent and exact. Then came the genealogical expert, the architect of the family tree that had unraveled 30 years of silence. She spoke about distant cousins who had submitted saliva samples to trace ancestry, about algorithmic comparisons, about branches of lineage narrowing from hundreds of possibilities to a single household in a small Texas county. She showed how public records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, were layered like sediment until one name surfaced repeatedly, converging with proximity, age, and access. The courtroom felt smaller as she spoke, as if the walls were inching inward around the inevitability of it. The defense attempted to fracture the narrative, suggesting contamination, mishandling, the fragility of old evidence stored in outdated conditions. They raised questions about chain of custody, about human error, about the seductive power of hindsight. They painted a picture of a rush to closure, a community desperate for answers after decades of grief. But each time they pressed, the prosecution countered with logs, signatures, timestamps, paper trails stretching back to 1988, yellowed but intact, each signature a silent witness refusing to fade. When the retired detective took the stand again, the air shifted. He was older now than most of the jurors' parents, his hair silver, his hands steady but marked by time. He did not perform. He did not embellish. He simply described what he had seen that night in 1988, the overturned chair, the broken glass, the silence of a house that should have been alive with ordinary sounds. He spoke of interviews conducted under flickering lights, of statements that almost aligned but never quite did, of a man who had seemed too composed, too rehearsed. He admitted that back then he lacked proof. He admitted that instinct is not evidence. But he said instinct can be a compass, pointing toward something unfinished. The prosecutor asked him what kept him returning to the file years after retirement. The courtroom stilled. He paused, eyes flicking briefly toward the victim's family seated in the front row. Because she never got to grow old, he said quietly. But he did. The words landed heavier than any forensic statistic. Outside, the community pulsed with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Coffee shops buzzed with whispered analysis of testimony. Social media feeds refreshed relentlessly, clips from the courtroom spreading faster than facts could settle. Cold case breakthrough. One headline read, "DNA seals fate in Texas 1988 murder," read another. Yet beneath the digital frenzy, older residents felt something deeper, a reckoning not just with a crime, but with their own memories of who they had trusted, who they had defended, who they had dismissed. Midway through the day, the prosecution played a recording from 1988. The defendant's original interview, preserved on tape, the audio grainy but clear enough to hear his steady voice claiming he had not been near the victim's home that week. The jurors listened as past and present collided. Then the prosecutor displayed a transcript from the recent interrogation where the same man admitted he had been inside the house the night she died, that there had been an argument, that he had lost control. The contrast was stark, the contradiction unavoidable. Time had eroded certainty, but sharpened inconsistencies. The defense called its own expert, challenging the reliability of decades-old biological samples. He spoke of degradation, of environmental variables, of the theoretical possibility of secondary transfer. He used phrases like reasonable doubt and statistical margins, constructing a framework of uncertainty. Yet when pressed under cross-examination about the probability of a coincidental match across multiple loci, he hesitated. Extremely unlikely, he conceded. The phrase lingered in the air, fragile but decisive. As afternoon light slanted through high windows, casting long bars across the courtroom floor, the victim's sister was called to testify. She walked to the stand slowly, each step deliberate. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied as she described the night in 1988 when police knocked on her door. She spoke of disbelief, of anger, of years marked not by holidays, but by anniversaries of loss. She did not speculate about guilt. She did not accuse. She simply described absence, the empty chair at family dinners, the unopened letters, the photographs that never changed while everyone else did. When asked how it felt to hear the defendant admit being at the house, she closed her eyes briefly. "It feels like the past finally stopped pretending," she said. There was no theatrics in her tone, only exhaustion layered over decades. The defendant watched her without expression. As closing arguments approached, tension coiled tighter. The prosecution framed the case as a bridge between eras, 1988 to the present, held together by science and persistence. They argued that while technology had evolved, truth had not. The defense countered with the dangers of retrospective certainty, warning jurors against the allure of a narrative too neatly resolved after 30 years of chaos. They urged caution, reminding the panel that doubt need not be allowed to exist. Night fell before the jury was dismissed to deliberate. The courthouse emptied slowly, footsteps echoing down corridors that had absorbed weeks of testimony. Outside, cameras continued broadcasting beneath streetlights, reporters summarizing the day's events in urgent tones. The phrase "Texas 1988 cold case" trended once more, looping through headlines like a refrain that refused to fade. Inside the deliberation room, 12 ordinary citizens faced a decision weighted by decades. They reviewed charts, transcripts, timelines. They replayed the audio of the 1988 interview, then the modern confession. They examined photographs from a crime scene older than some of them. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper and the low murmur of careful debate. In a small holding cell, the defendant sat alone, hands clasped, eyes unfocused. 30 years of freedom pressed against the possibility of its abrupt end. Whatever story he had told himself over the decades, about mistakes, about fate, about forgetting, was now stripped bare under fluorescent light. Across town, the victim's family gathered in a quiet living room, television muted, waiting. They had waited through seasons, through funerals, through milestones she never reached. Waiting had become a second language. Yet this night felt different, charged, brittle, on the edge of something irreversible. Near midnight, the jury sent a note. Deliberations would continue in the morning. The courthouse lights dimmed one by one, but the weight of the day did not dissipate. It hung over the town like a storm refusing to break, a storm 30 years in the making. The science had spoken. The testimonies had echoed. The past had been excavated layer by layer until only a single question remained, suspended between 12 strangers and a history that refused to stay buried. In the quiet that followed, there was no headline yet, no verdict to broadcast. Only the hum of anticipation, the echo of a retired detective's unwavering belief, and the knowledge that by this time tomorrow, a Texas 1988 cold case would either close with finality or fracture once more under the strain of doubt.